Our world is deep into a process of profound transformation. It's always changing, but right now the gods have their feet firmly on the accelerator. If you're awake to the deeper shifts that are underway, or even if you just follow global news at a superficial level, this should be becoming pretty clear by now. But by the end of next year, it'll be obvious to absolutely everyone. Because astrology is pointing to 2025 as a year that will upend the global order and set us firmly on the path towards a brave new world. In a recent video on this channel, SJ Anderson and I talked about the prospects for conflict at a global level. Unfortunately, it's simply not realistic to think that the world can change significantly without some turbulence, and 2025 is when we'll really start to feel it. Now, in this video, SJ and I are going to explain why that is. We're going to talk about the potential for civil conflict in the US, as well as the ongoing geopolitical crises. But be not afraid. There are compelling reasons to think that we may actually be close to some sort of global renaissance, waiting for us once the tough parts of this transition are through. So in this video, we're going to give it to you straight about the prospects for the world next year. No doom mongering, but no spiritual bypassing either. Just our best assessments of the portents in the sky and on the ground, the good, the bad, and the ugly. So strap yourself in and get ready for another journey into the past to understand the present and the future. I'm your host, Dan Waits, and let's get into this. If you're enjoying this video so far, please do hit the like button so the YouTube gods know that. And please do subscribe to this channel if you like what you're watching and want more of it. Now, the rhythms of history are pointing to this decade as the pivotal one of the 21st century. Around this time, several huge historical shifts, like the French and American revolutions, the US Civil War, and the end of World War II, and the world that emerged at that time, are all reaching moments of cyclical resonance. And there's no getting around the fact that we're in a dangerous looking moment, with big escalations looming in conflicts in Europe, the Middle East, and possibly even elsewhere. We're also on the cusp of a highly contentious election in the US that could lead to more division, discord, and possibly even violence there. Both SJ and I have released election prediction videos, and both of us believe the Democrats and Kamala Harris are more likely to win. As I said in my video, that's not a statement of support, it's just what I think is most likely. But what's also true is that it's not an easy call. Both candidates have things going for them astrologically, and frankly, I wouldn't be surprised if either of them won.
So we all know America is under great pressure with major changes shown in the astrology, both the collective and the root chart astrology for America. Pluto in Aquarius is the Pluto return of the US Constitution. Uranus in Gemini has always brought wars.
Since the founding of the United States, every time Uranus has returned to Gemini, where it was at the Declaration of Independence in 1776, the US has taken part in a serious armed conflict that resulted in big changes to how the country is configured. We had the Civil War from 1861 to 1865, which began with Uranus in Gemini. And then we had World War II, which the US entered in 1941 after the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor in December of that year. Uranus wasn't in Gemini at that moment, but its transition into the sign had already begun, and it would remain in the sign for the rest of the war.
So the astrology clearly says risks for war for America, risks for great change for America. But let's put a little bit of color on these scenarios as we get closer to the moment. I want to talk a little bit about the Aquarius nature of America. The US with its Aquarius moon, the moon being the people. Everybody can come to America. It's a mix of peoples, a mix of religions. It's built into the Constitution, freedom of speech, freedom of religion. And so I want to think about this moment and just how Aquarian it is. Jupiter and Saturn met in Aquarius in 2020. And that was when Kamala Harris first became vice president, first woman vice president. The other thing about this age is that Pluto will be fully in Aquarius soon. And so we're about to be in a very Pluto and Aquarian era for 20 years until 2044. During Inauguration Day 2025, Pluto's back in Aquarius. And so Aquarius being the sign of the new innovation, the new structure, it would fit that there's an Aquarian turn as a result of this election here in November 2024. And Kamala is in office. I want to go to Dane Rudyard, who in his book, The Pulse of Life, wrote, "Thus the Aquarians yearning for the unfamiliar and the foreign, for the newest fads or for the movements which are supposed to revive and restore the true foundation of democracy and human freedom. And I think here, as he writes about Aquarian being foreign and just how to have a woman president, that would be foreign to all of the presidents that have come before. Kamala Harris has parents that weren't born here, though she was born in Oakland. So she is by her nature kind of foreign in a way. And how she would fit that Aquarian turn, both embodying the Sibley chart moon and then meeting the Aquarian moment we're in with these outer planet cycles.
Now, big historical shifts are often indicated by slow-moving outer planets changing sign. For example, on April 13th, 1861, Neptune moved into Aries. That was just one day after the beginning of the American Civil War. Pluto made its last ingress into Cancer in May 1914. 2 months later, World War I began. But 2025 will see not one, not two, but three of these sign changes. Saturn and Neptune will move into Aries, while Uranus will move into Gemini. Now, the sign placement of Neptune next year makes things look more similar to the Civil War period than World War II. As with the Civil War, we have the planet of the popular mood, ideals, and ideology in the sign of the self and individualism, opposing Libra, the sign of union. And of course, the mood of division and polarization in the United States seems to be pointing in that direction right now.
What is the most likely scenario for some kind of US Civil War echo, or this dispute between the people of America, a split, if you will? Doesn't have to be a new literal civil war, but some kind of resonance or echo. My sense is that if Harris were to win, and then you've got another Stop the Steal movement from Trump and his supporters, that would sort of fit this symbolism because it's already set up. We already had the January 6th scenario injected into our reality. We already have this battle line kind of drawn where Trump claims he didn't even lose in 2020. I think that's kind of a perfect storm for 2025 being the people that feel victimized by a stolen election, and then Kamala Harris, this Aquarian force and power, and you get this sort of resonance or echo with Civil War energy. Let's come into some news stories. July 2024, the Supreme Court ruled that Donald Trump cannot be prosecuted for actions that were within the constitutional powers as president. And then later this summer in August, the grand jury returned a superseding indictment, charging Trump again with the same offenses. And we're back now where Trump is under threat from what they call lawfare. I mean, it's kind of the perfect storm if you're thinking about what could trigger a new division in America, where there's these two parties and then one leader is kind of taken out by this lawfare, and then Kamala comes into office, and there you go. We've already seen violence. Summer in July, when Thomas Crooks attempted to shoot former president at a rally in Butler, Pennsylvania. So we've had political violence already here in 2024. Later in July, 22 July, at a rally in Middletown, Ohio, Republican State Senator from Ohio, George Lang, took to the stage before J.D. Vance was going to speak. This is exactly what Lang said. He says, "We're in a fight for the soul of our nation. We are in a fight for our kids and grandkids." I believe wholeheartedly Trump and Vance are the last chance to save our country politically. I'm afraid if we lose this one, it's going to take a civil war to save the country, and it will be saved. So, I mean, again, these MAGA people promising a civil war, or at least in rhetoric, saying it's going to be necessary if Trump loses.
Of course, the forces that are backing the Democratic Party right now have their own ways of using violence and provoking unrest.
Do we see violent responses to Trump being elected? During the summer of 2020 with the George Floyd protests, they had to barricade the White House with a lot of those protests going into the White House. And so I think either side, no matter who wins, we're kind of primed for political violence.
We've already seen 2 attempts on Trump's life, and so if he won the election, who's to say we couldn't see more, or we couldn't see other covert efforts to disrupt his presidency? Of course, he might take action against those who oppose him, whether overtly or covertly, which could have spiraling consequences that bring about more division in the US. And that way, we see the Neptune-Aries dynamic again. So even with a Trump victory, you could still see how a scenario of conflict and separatism might emerge in the US. But that's not all. Eclipses in recent years have also highlighted the US as ripe for change.
2025 is also a fascinating year because of the overlapping eclipse peaks timed using the Ptolemaic techniques for solar eclipse timing. taught by Ben Dykes. And remember, America has had solar eclipses in 2023 October and then April 2024, visible solar eclipses crisscrossing America. When you have a visible solar eclipse, you then run these Ptolemaic formulas to get a time when there could be peaks of those eclipse effects. The thing about 2025, late in the year, the peak of the October 2023 eclipse overlaps with the peak period of the April 2024 eclipse. From 6 October through 20 November, there's this overlap, and you can check out more on that in my video called The Rebirth of America on my YouTube channel here, SJ Anderson 144 on YouTube. The reason why it's important when we start talking about America is that eclipses can bring these changes, these big changes, these tears in reality and these major changes. And so to have the peaks of those two eclipses overlapping in late 2025, it gives us some high indication that we haven't even seen the impact of the eclipse cycle in America. And that eclipse cycle could be things like Trump being arrested and then maybe being released the end of 2025 and lead some kind of charge. I mean, I hate to even think about what these scenarios could be, but we've got to be aware that 2025 brings great activation for how America might be under pressure as a result of these astrological techniques.
What's difficult for the US right now is that it's facing difficulties domestically while ceding challenges to its geopolitical power at the same time. And right on time, Mars, the planet of conflict, is about to station retrograde. Mars will station retrograde in the 7th degree of Leo on December the 6th this year. It'll then cross the sign boundary between Leo and Cancer on January the 6th, 2025, and station direct on February the 24th in Cancer.
But it's always a useful period to study Mars direct periods, because in history, the periods after Mars is stationed direct have often led to triggers in terms of war and conflict. And these become even more important when you know that Neptune and Saturn enter Mars's sign, and they'll be there together in summer 2025. So let's just walk through them quickly. The 9/11 event in America, September 11th, 2001, came 53 days after Mars's direct station. Pearl Harbor was 27 days after a Mars direct station. And then Gulf War I, Operation Desert Storm, came 16 days after a Mars direct station. So you often have these flash events when Mars gains power and starts moving direct, where actors maybe that are astrologically literate are choosing these periods because they understand the symbolism of Mars being direct is a good time to act, maybe. Or it's just a symbolic resonance in the synchronistic nature of the reality that we're in, that when Mars is direct, we get forward movement with these crisis conflict events. But that happens here in 2025. On 24 February, Mars will station direct in Cancer, the cardinal sign of initiation. And it makes March and April 2025 uniquely interesting, given that March is also the first of these ingresses into Aries of Neptune and Saturn. Neptune goes into Aries in March 2025, just in this aftermath of Mars's direct station. And the ingress of Neptune into Aries kicked off the last cycle, the US Civil War in 1861. If you turn on the news in March of 2025 and you see an event, know there is some kind of mystical, magical, synchronistic resonance with our astrology. That will help take the pressure off.
But if there's one time to pay attention to in 2025, it's early August. In early August 2025, around the 7th to the 9th of that month, we'll see the formation of this aspect pattern, which is called a kite. It features a minor grand trine between the three outermost planets, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto, but with the addition of Saturn, which will be conjunct Neptune. But crucially, it features an opposition between Mars and Saturn. This tells us that this is an important moment in the 2-year cycle of those two planets. The Mars-Saturn cycle is about episodes of challenge and strife unfolding in the world. This moment will bring up themes related to the current Mars-Saturn cycle that have been in the air since their last conjunction in April of this year. And there are at least 2 unfolding stories that I'm paying attention to in relation to this cycle. Firstly, in April, at the time of this Mars-Saturn conjunction, we saw direct confrontation between Israel and Iran. We also saw an attack on the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant in Ukraine, currently held by Russia at this time. Both Russia and Ukraine accused each other of being responsible. Then, when Mars and Saturn reached their first square in late July and August, we saw a return to these themes. The Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant was set on fire. And once again, we saw the theme of conflict between Israel and Iran and its proxy Hezbollah coming up. I think we can expect these themes to come up again, and probably in a more dramatic way, in early August 2025 at this configuration. But what's unusual about it is the way that it dials in the three outermost planets, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto.
So these outer planets, these movers of the tonality of reality, these great generational planets are involved in this. Then Mars comes to trigger right on that cardinal axis. I think 9 August is a very interesting date to watch, and maybe leading up to that, as Mars enters Libra in the days before and then begins to apply to Saturn.
And here, I think we need to dig a little deeper into the theme of nuclear weapons. The beginning of the nuclear age arguably dates back to December the 2nd, 1942, when scientists at the University of Chicago started the first controlled nuclear fission reaction. That moment gives us this chart, which tends to get triggered at moments when the themes of nuclear technology or nuclear weapons are surging into the zeitgeist. And the Kite configuration of early August is tightly configured to this chart. We can see that the Moon-Neptune conjunction in the nuclear chart is in the first couple of degrees of Libra, and so the Mars-Saturn opposition is right over it.
I want to come to astrologer Jamie Patridge from the Astrology King website. He's got a really nice write-up on Kite aspect patterns. And he says, but even the Kite aspect pattern is not immune to crisis. One day you must open up to new people and develop yourself. The opposition indicates the axis topic, where the crisis must occur. And again, it's Aries Libra. The crisis must occur in new passionate breakage and initiation around the unity of the order. You wonder if 9 August next year is when some kind of crisis may emerge, where countries are going to be forced to come off their high horse a little bit and say, we're in a collective human family. We better start talking to each other to resolve these problems. We might be forced to do that.
I wonder if we might come close to, or even experience, a tragedy involving nuclear technology. Or perhaps we could be looking at a Cuban Missile Crisis type moment here, which also came at an opposition of Mars and Saturn.
You really wonder if this is telling us, hey, get ready. We're going to be confronted with, hopefully, maybe crisis that we then resolve. I love crisis for forcing resolution. So often in history, that's been the case. The Cuban Missile Crisis, we got very close, but then cooler heads prevailed. True leadership stepped up and brought humanity back from the brink. And that's what I hope these symbols indicate.
Perhaps this moment shocks us out of our complacency and leads to change, or even a collective awakening of some kind. That awakening is already underway, of course, but it seems to be reaching some sort of peak moment here in August 2025. You'd be forgiven for getting a bit worried at this point, and I am too, frankly, but there are also good astrological reasons to think that this moment won't be anything like a worst case scenario and could actually have positive consequences. The archetypal synodic cycle, that's a cycle of 2 planets in relation to the Earth, is that of the Sun and Moon. From the new moon, a moment of darkness, the moon waxes into its fullness and then retreats again and begins the cycle anew. And so the cycle looks outwards and then inwards as the moon returns to source. And cycles of other pairs of planets are the same. Waxing cycles tend to indicate growth and expansion in the new, while waning cycles have to do with consolidation, reflection, and the pruning of the old to make way for the new. And the good news is that very soon, if we look at the slowest moving outer planets, we will find that almost all their cycles will be waxing, not waning. This is one of the reasons that the legendary late French astrologer André Barbeau was very optimistic about the world from 2026 onwards. He thought we'd be seeing the emergence of a global civilization that uplifted the less fortunate people of the world by this time.
Dan and I have talked often about this so-called basket. It's almost a perfect configuration of all 5 of these Barbeau outer planets or modern outer planets. It comes in July 2026. So that early July, those first 2 weeks of July 2026, some of the most powerful, transcendent moments of astrology we'll get to live through. I'd be planning for that. Where do you want to be? July 2026. Where do you want to be? Barbeau said it would be the end of a crisis. Other commentators are pointing to it as a breakthrough for humanity to lead us into something much better than these crisis years we've seen since 2020. One thing to note about the basket is simply that summer 2025 is major because it's an early arrival of that minor grand trine of outer planets by sign here in summer 2025, and they're all very close in orb. So you'll have Saturn in Aries, you'll have Neptune in Aries, you'll have Uranus in Gemini, you'll have Pluto in Aquarius, all in summer 2025 for a period together. Jupiter will be in Cancer, not in Leo, but it's still a major deal. So if you're thinking about this 2026 moment and how important it is, you gotta also be thinking about summer 2025 and how important that is. Neptune on 22nd October 2025 re-enters Pisces, and then we lose that configuration. Saturn is also back in Pisces, starting on 1 September 2025. So we're not quite there, but it's a big injection. Sometimes when a transit begins, even though there's a planetary regress back into the previous sign, that's when the whole story arrives and begins. I've seen it over and over again. So summer 2025 takes on a huge importance, especially after the 7 July ingress of Uranus into Gemini. Back to Jamie Partridge on the website Astrology King. Great site, great writing, very comprehensive. He's very good with these modern aspect patterns, but he writes, blue aspect patterns are called talent triangles, and they give a lot of reserves. They indicate abundantly available abilities, competence, expressiveness, skillfulness, and striving for harmony. So we're looking for abundantly available abilities, competence, expressiveness, skillfulness, striving for harmony. All things that are quite positive, right? The flow of support where we can really step into power and have a lot of green lights from the astrological symbol set that we can come into our greater powers, greater harmony. And this is the reason why we may not get a conflict. What if war doesn't happen? It doesn't have to happen. Remember, we can pray for peace, and what if the reality breaks the other way and we break to peace and innovation and all of the new wonderful technologies that are arriving to lead us into some kind of creative new age where there's less poverty and less suffering and more material support for all beings. It's not some kind of global conflict, and this would match what Barbeau saw.
Now, in this episode of the Astrology of the 2020s, we explored the Cyclic Index, which Barbeau is known for popularizing, and which was invented by another French astrologer, Henri-Joseph Gauchamp. It works like this. There are 10 pairs of the 5 slowest planets from Jupiter to Pluto. We add together the degrees of angular separation of each pair of planets to get a number. For example, in this chart taken for October the 2nd, 2024, Jupiter and Uranus are separated by 24.4 degrees and so forth. We add together the 10 numbers for the 10 pairs of planets to get the index number for that date. Then we calculate the number at regular intervals, such as once a year or more often than that, and then we plot the results on a graph. I've made this one using free online software called Lunarium at lunarium.co.uk. When the number is falling, it tells us that cycles are predominantly in their waning phases. When it's rising, cycles are mostly waxing. And when it reaches bottoms, cycles are predominantly close to conjunction. And so big cycles are ending and beginning. These tend to be more chaotic and challenging times in geopolitics. They're turning points. Here's the index for the 20th century, and you can see there are bottoms at the time of the First and Second World Wars. If we look to our current time, we can see there was another big dip around 2020 to 2022, the time of the COVID pandemic and the start of the war in Ukraine. We're still arguably in the crisis dip right now, but we're heading out of it, not into it. Now, that doesn't mean there can't be suffering or crisis in the world. We can see those things with our own eyes right now. But it does give us some grounds for hope that perhaps things won't go as badly as some are predicting it will. This is backed up by the work of another master astrologer whose approach to mundane astrology is similar to that of Barbeau, the Dutchman Robert Doolaard. Doolaard has done extensive work on war and the outer planet cycles. And in the exclusive members-only version of this video, available for World Astrology Report members, we look at Doolaard's work and why it gives us reasons to be optimistic about the current moment, particularly in terms of the prospects for global war. Doolaard's findings are truly remarkable. They validate astrology in a striking way, and personally, understanding them has given me a lot of hope for the future. And hopefully, they can for you too. If you love what we do on this channel, then please do consider becoming a member. You'll also get access to extended versions of all my videos since May, all my exclusive live streams for members, and a private forum where we can exchange on the topics we discuss on this channel. So I'd love to see you over there. If we look at the cycles of the planets in early 2026, after the conjunction of Saturn and Neptune in February, 9 out of 10 of the synodic cycles will be waxing, meaning the faster moving planet is ahead of the slower one in the zodiac. Only one of these 10 cycles, the Saturn-Uranus cycle, will be waning. And this is one of the reasons that Barbeau singled out 2026 as being when he thought our crisis would end. What all this tells me is that if we do see a global conflict, it's not likely to be anything like World War II, when the great powers pretty much fought each other to the death, and it will be nowhere near as destructive. As I've said before, my feeling is that what we're looking at in the coming years is more like a new Cold War, when the world is somehow split into opposing camps. I don't want to minimize the seriousness of this. The Cold War involved some devastating proxy wars all over the world, bringing terrible suffering to some places. And we're seeing devastating proxy wars once again right now. But again, I don't think we're looking at a global catastrophe. Now, if we turn back to the nuclear chart, we can see that around the time of this Kite formation, we'll have reached the Uranus return and the Neptune opposition of the nuclear age. Both of these things suggest there's a turning point here in the story of nuclear weapons. Does something happen here that brings a new approach to this technology and to geopolitics in general? In the same Kite chart, we find that the two benefic planets, Jupiter and Venus, are conjunct in the moon sign of Cancer, a sign that evokes themes of protection, home, and nurture. So we see great love expressed here in protective places of care, in families, in countries, and perhaps even the level of the planetary family.
You know, it's bigger than you or I. And I want to think about this decade as much about that as anything else, as waking us up individually as much as collectively and coming into our true spiritual nature. We're loving beings. Human love is the most powerful force in reality. And that's what the purpose of this crisis may be, is to show us what love means at a deeper level.
I also wonder if reality could play some sort of strange wild card here. If you have your ear to the ground, you'll know that very strange things are happening in terms of what we know and understand about the true nature of reality right now. To my mind, the major example is that after decades of claiming that it knows nothing about UFOs and that they don't pose any kind of threat anyway, the US government has started to tell us that they are in fact real and that they may indeed pose a threat. And that's a shift that I think a lot of people are underestimating the significance of. And I think this is one of the directions that this wild card could come from. The UFO phenomenon may represent visits from non-human intelligences. It may represent secret technology owned by world governments, or even some sort of breakaway civilization, or possibly all of the above. Whatever it is, I think it'll play a big role in the story of the coming years, and it could be a reason why any global conflict is over quickly, maybe relatively painlessly. But before we go, there's one last thing. One of the themes we've talked about in several recent videos on this channel is the coming emphasis on the sign of Aries, which has to do with the self and its discovery and expression, versus the Libran impulse to harmonize and unify. This dynamic will play out on a global scale, but I think we'll all experience this struggle to greater or lesser degrees. And at the individual level, it could well be about our own fight to maintain our personal sovereignty as information technology, whether you're in the West or Russia or China or anywhere else in the world, starts to create what looks like a totalizing panopticon. And so in our next collaborative episodes, SJ and I will tackle the subjects of technological and systemic change in the world. Thanks so much to SJ for joining me once again on this channel.
You can follow me at sjanderson144.com. That's my website. I've got links there to everything. You can schedule astrology readings with me there. YouTube and Instagram, I'm posting content regularly. I've got a monthly forecast every month on my YouTube channel. And you can support me on Patreon. I've got multiple tiers there, including a monthly live stream where we can break down some of the astrology as it unfolds. I've got a weekly newsletter available there called Lunar Signals that breaks down the energy of the week ahead. So check my Patreon out. And Dan, thank you again. Great to be with you. Take care, everyone. Peace.
In the meantime, if you want to whet your appetite for the coming episode, I suggest you watch my New Age 2026 series, in which I covered some of the same ground we've talked about today. And it starts with this episode, which explains why the cycle of Pluto and Neptune is so important to understanding the changing nature of the times. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.